Welcome back to the Adapt or Die podcast. I'm your host with the most, Armel Tala.
And I'm your host on the low, Ben Smith. This podcast is focused on one thing: finding practical ways to improve your health, wealth, and happiness.
As I like to say, you only peak once you stop trying. Thanks for joining us in our journey of lifelong learning.
And now it's time for the next episode of
The Adapt or Die podcast. Welcome back to another episode. New book alert. What book are we reading today?
We are on Grit by Angela Duckworth. What do you think of this book?
Before we do that, though, because I always forget to do this, make sure you guys like, subscribe, comment if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening off a podcast, it would be greatly appreciated if you leave us a review, or if you're listening on Spotify. But back to the conversation at hand. What did I think about this book? This book was it was a good reminder of things. That's the best way I can put it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It wasn't very profound. It wasn't like Naval's book where just a lot of information where you're like, wow. Like, it wasn't my first time hearing these ideas. Because generally it's like, I'm already I feel like I already think about grit, the thing we'll be talking about. I think I already embody grit in some aspects. There's some other aspects I need to work on, which was very nice reminder. I think one of the most profound things she said we'll hit on is just about consistency. Over passion is consistency, not that spark. So I thought it wasn't a profound book, but it was a great reminder of the things that you need to do to be successful. What about you?
Yeah, I echo those sentiments, and I think like a lot of the times like these are the books that you need just to like set you back on track. It's like, oh, like don't forget, like you need to concentrate on this, and this. Like don't forget about everything else. So definitely on the same page there. I guess you just want to jump in.
Yeah, and I think with a lot of books that we'll read through, and then you guys will be listening to, and hopefully if you guys have time reading them as well, is a lot of the ideas start to repeat themselves throughout books. So then it's like you're reading different books, maybe hearing the same ideas, but it just helps to ingrain it more and more where you can really, embody them. Because when you read a book, like, let's do this. What was like the most, what was like the biggest thing you took away from this book that you still remember without, like, before you made this outline, like the thing that you took away from the book?
Honestly, just because we talked about it so much, it was Kaizen, like just like continual progress, just like always pushing forward. But yeah, no, that's honestly what it was.
Yeah, I like that. She gave me a word, Kaizen. Really like that. That embodies me. I'm gonna get that tattooed on myself. But the thing I took away from this book is gonna be the quote. It's just that we live far below our potential. Most humans don't ever reach their potential. So those are things to think about. But let's just get started. The basics of grit. What is grit? You've maybe heard you're gritty. Like, what does that even mean? But we'll start here. This idea of grit ties into how do you reach your goals? How do you achieve things, right? And so Angela proposes like this baseline for success. And the question she asks is, why do people succeed? What makes individuals quote unquote special? So she's in graduate school when she was kind of doing these interviews for her Ph.D. program. She interviewed a bunch of successful people from sports, those in sports, academia, business, art, law, all these different professions, medicine. And there's 3 types of responses she would get. The first one was like a typical response, and this was them generally saying, luck and talent. I was lucky enough, like Jeff Bezos says, I was, fortunate enough for certain things to fall into place. And also, talent, like kind of just maybe, just kind of was a natural thing that you picked up, right? And then second was there was domain specific responses. And like these one was like artists saying, oh, I just love creating. I'm not sure why I do. I just like love it. So like they just have this obsession for that thing they do. For athletes, being the competitive people we are. I still consider myself an athlete. Winners love to compete head to head with other people. Winners hate losing. And so definitely hate losing more than you like winning. And then business people, I like this response from business people in terms of what makes someone successful, right, in their field. He says you've got to be able to make calculated decisions about millions of dollars and still go to sleep at night. So just kind of this highlighting that like there's a general luck and talent about like, oh, okay, there's a bit of luck here, there's a bit of talent response, and there's the ones that are specific to what that person does, right? But then like this overarching one, the third response you would get was perseverance, which many of you probably are not surprised by this. And that's one of the theme of the book is the information she drops. It's not anything that you're like, wow, I just didn't think about that way, or it's counterintuitive. It's very straightforward, but I think it's understanding like why is this so important, right? And she say, so many potentially successful people don't live up to their potential, right? You have like draft busts, like people that get drafted number one and they're, just terrible, one hit wonders, make one song and you never hear about them again. And so the thing is, you don't have to be talented in order to achieve great things. Like these one hit wonders, these people that had a lot of potential to be successful but failed, the thing they were missing is they weren't working insanely hard. So you can be not talented, but work insanely hard and you can achieve amazing things. And a great example of this is like actually Tom Brady. Like Tom Brady, I think he got drafted like was like
He was the last pick in the draft,
the last pick in the
or maybe
draft.
second to last, but yeah.
Something like the bottom, and now he's considered the GOAT. And I don't even think it's arguable.
No, it's
like,
not. It's undisputable.
Like
It's,
he's the GOAT. He
he's
has like
that
the
dude.
most rings and all that great stuff. So not the most talented, because that's what the drive bases off of talent. But he worked insanely hard. And another one was examples you used with some writer. And the quote from this one is like, this one guy, he wasn't actually the best writer at the beginning. We used to read his stories and have to laugh because the writing was so clumsy and melodramatic. He got better and better as he wrote more. And then he won the Guggenheim, the Guggenheim Award. Took me a long time to process how to say that. But kind of Duckworth's conclusion here was there's two things that are in common across highly successful individuals, and that's an unusual resilience and work ethic, perseverance. So crazy. It's at the point where you're like, this person has to actually be crazy. And second is direction, which is they have a deep knowledge of what they want to do, right? Of what they want and what they want to do. And you can tie this as passion. And otherwise, this all encompass this idea of grit as defined by Duckworth.
Yeah, and so Mel talked a lot about talent, right? And we kind of, we kind of all know what talent means. It's like, a natural gift, as connotations of like you're just kind of born with like a higher starting point, or like maybe you can get farther or you can improve faster than everyone else, right? But one thing that she points out is like our culture often like we really idolize talent, right? We see someone and we're like, whoa, like they're so talented, like whoa, like they have so much potential. And of course, like we do praise people for, like Tom Brady, like wow, like he put in the work, you know what I mean? But for the most part, as a culture, we recognize and uplift people who we think are like, God-given abilities. Like they're just so otherness,
And I want to add on the Tom Brady part, like until you knew his story, and if you didn't know his story, people would think like, oh, he must have been so talented to get to where he was. Because we don't, until we hear about the amount of work or get the relative idea, we jump to this assumption of magic.
Yeah, and that's a great point. One thing this is one of the biggest takeaways. Skill acquired through practice is indistinguishable from skill that is due to talent, right? It is impossible to look at someone and say, yeah, they're skilled because they're talented versus they're skilled because they put in the work. There is no difference, right? And a lot of it is, you can't really be skilled at something if you don't put in a lot of practice, I think, in my opinion, the majority is actually practice, and then it is compounded by your ability or how talented you are, right? But the practice is vital. And so I like this quote by Nietzsche. He says, with everything perfect, we do not ask how it came to be. We rejoice in the present fact as though it came out of the ground by magic. And so one thing that's interesting, like we idolize talent, right? And we also attribute people who have done great things or have achieved excellence. We attribute that to their talent or their supposed talent, right? Because we we can't fathom how much work it took to get there, and it seems impossible. It's like there's no way someone put in that much work and was able to get there without some God-given ability, right? Something has to be special about them. Like there's no possible way it was just straight experience, consistency, and practice that produced what they just produced, right? But a lot of that is also like we don't want to feel that we could be a lot more than ourselves, right? Because when we're seeing those people do that, if we attribute excellency to talent, it excuses ourselves, right? We don't have to do that because, we could never have done it in the first place. But if it is done through, just consistency and hard work, then it's like, dang, like I don't have an excuse anymore. Like, and so a large part of that is just lifting that burden of failure, I guess, off our own shoulders and placing it onto something that's other. And we just call that talent. So the point of all that was just that talent absolutely exists, but it never produces greatness. Work ethic is vital.
And that's something just gotta repeat. Like skill through practice is indistinguishable from skill due to talent. Like that's very, very, very important. And it ties into this idea that Angela Duckworth, um, maybe she thought this was very profound. I'm just saying this as a joke, laughing about this, but effort counts twice. And what does excellence look like? It's actually extremely mundane. So, because we see those that are achieving great things, and if we don't understand the background, we assume that there's some magic, there's some hidden talent that they have, right? But when we look deeper into it, we see this mundane process that actually allowed them to, perform at the highest level on the highest stages, depending, right? And something from Chambliss, some sociologist. I'll pull from the last part of the quote here is there's nothing extraordinary or superhuman in any one of those actions. Only the fact that they are done consistently and correctly and altogether produce excellence. Think about that. That one just kind of sits because you're like, to reach excellence, excellence is this thing that is like a bigger, really kind of this magical thing, right? It's like, oh, there's excellence, there's this achievement, and the awards go off. But like the process to doing that is just so mundane. It's boring. Everything up until the point is boring. And so why do we talk about talent rather than consistency? And that's because consistency is boring, right? It's difficult to sell, Imagine if you're watching some like motivational video and they're just like, I don't know. Yeah, Jeff woke up at 9 o'clock in the morning every day. Or that's not even that crazy.
Yeah,
Jeff
that's not
woke up at
what
like 6 a.m. in the morning every day. You're like, cool. Right? So it's difficult to sell the thing of like, oh, this person did this every single day, each and every day. But we'd rather, every time you go on, the news or something, they're either talking about some child prodigy or some like super talented person, but they're not talking about the hours that person might have put in, right? And so talent seems godlike, and it's simply like some God just, gifted them with this power. And we can't imagine how much work someone else had to put to get to where they are. So this is Angela Duckworth kind of equations, formula for achievement, right? And so we have to first start off with, and this is Angela's, to be more specific, Angela Duckworth's success theory. So skill equals talent times effort, right? And this seems pretty obvious, right? The more practice, if you want to be skilled at something, right? Let's say shooting, there might be some specific talent. I don't know what talent would be specific with shooting that you have, but more importantly, it is the practice, the amount of hours and shots that you put in over and over again, right? And talent, of course, can help. Specifically, maybe there's something else that you're talented in. But then an achievement, right? So you can be really skilled shooter, but maybe never achieve anything. So then you have to add more talent, right? So her equation for achievement is achievement equals skill times effort. The more practice, the more achievements you'll have, which just means your effort counts twice. So to simply put, achievement equals skill times effort squared. Pretty profound. Pretty profound. And so an example she gives in the book is a potter. So there's this dude named Warren McKenzie. He's a 92-year-old potter. He worked his entire like adult life, I guess, just doing pottery. And so a good potter makes around 40 to 50 in a day. Some are good, some are bad. But making more pots improves your skill. But the thing is, while Warren is making more pots, he's actually making some pretty amazing pots that people really, really like, and that kind of give him some success and achievement in the pottery world, right? And so, therefore, while he's improving his skill, he's also reaching achievements. He's also able to get certain achievements at the same time. So this is kind of the idea of how like effort counts twice in this. But I like to interpret it as like, there's you have to put a lot of effort in with your talent to get this initial skill. But when you get that skill too, you have to put in even more effort. So I don't think it's this thing of like overlapping the efforts that you do both, but I think more in the terms that you have to do both. Like you have to put in a lot of effort to get the skill, but you also have to put in a lot of effort to actually achieve things with that skill. And so, and last thing, this Woody Allen. I think I know who Woody Allen is. I've heard that name before.
Entertainment,
Yeah.
entertainment dude.
So advice for young artists, and he goes, my observation was that once a person actually completed a play or a novel, they were well on their way to getting it produced or published, as opposed to a vast majority of people who tell their ambition is to write, but who strike out on the very first level and indeed never write the play or the book. Like 80% of success in life is just showing up.
And so one thing that Angela Duckworth came up with is called the grit scale. And I actually thought that this was one of the more useful things in the book, because the scale had roughly like 10 questions that you could ask yourself. And then, filling out the scale, I was like, this probably, that's not really inaccurate, because you're just like reflecting like what you would want to be, as far as your grittiness goes. But the questions themselves were kind of helped you guide how to think about perseverance and passion. So, here are some sample grit scale questions. Or they're only questions as much as like you read the statement and then on a scale of 1 to 5, you identify with how much that describes you, right? So the first one is setbacks don't discourage me. I don't give up easily. The second one, I have difficulty maintaining my focus on projects that take more than a few months to complete. The third, I am a hard worker. And then the fourth one, I'll say, I have been obsessed with a certain idea or project for a short time, but later lost interest. And so I don't know if you guys noticed, but two of those questions were mainly just kind of like describing your ability to persevere, to like push through. So like setbacks don't discourage me. I'm a hard worker. I don't give up. But two of those were more geared towards your ability to stay consistent with a project, like your ability to stay and like do something, not just for a short time, not for a few months, not even a year, many years, right? Can you actually keep your interest, your curiosity, your passion for something through time? And that's what her focus was, a lot in the book as well, explaining that grit is much more about stamina than it is about intensity, right? It requires years of consistency to be excellent in a field, right? No matter how fast or how efficient or how hard you're going, right? If you only do it for a couple years, you're never going to be the best, right? You have to do something decades to be the best. And so this quote's pretty good. She says, grit is about working on something you are about so much that you're willing to stay loyal to it. It's what you love, but not just falling in love, staying in love. So it's this idea of grit, or passion more specifically, is endurance. Okay. So, and the two components to grit is perseverance and passion. So how resilient are you generally? And then have you found something that you can do consistently for years? And that wraps up the first part of the episode.
Perseverance and passion. And like, I don't know, she said this and I was like, makes sense.
But Mel and I were talking, we were like, yeah, like, makes sense. Yeah, all of this is like, this book is very, like we said, it's a great reminder, or a great like intro book. If you've never really been exposed to these ideas, or you've never been exposed to like how much you have to work or like how hard it can be, then this is a good idea. Reading this book, like she has so many examples, it really gives you an idea of like what it actually takes. But on the whole, these are very like simple and repeated concepts throughout the book. Doesn't mean they're easy, but they're very simple.
Easy to take in, hard to execute.
Exactly.
Let's get to debriefing this.
Yes. So my first question to you, this is a very like Did you ever take theory of knowledge in high school? Did they make y'all take that? Maybe that was
No.
like an IB school thing. They made us all take it. Um, but they always said like to what extent. That was like all the questions they had. Like they all started with to what extent. But anyways, to what extent does success depend on mundanity and consistency? So we talked about how important that is, but like how how important is it relative to other things?
Yeah, I think I saw something. Can't remember what it was. Person said the gap between your goals and you achieving them is discipline. Like, like that was pretty
Yeah.
profound. I was like the way they put it, that was pretty profound. Like
That is, yeah.
the gap between your goals and your achievements is discipline. And so discipline is one of those things where it's like where it is mundane. You know, it's like, are you disciplined enough to? What me and Ben want to do is like wake up around 6 o'clock or earlier every single day during the week, and make sure we're doing the work right. And like I think it's actually like all of it, to be honest, in terms of success. Because what besides those moments when you do achieve them, it's like you do all these little things every single day for that just one moment. Let's say like, you know, you're always putting in the work for that one playoff game that one playoff series you have to play for a boxer, right? Like especially for a boxer, it's like they go months and months training for this one fight and won't have another one until like 2 years or something. And so it truly is like what it I think it's yeah, Dan, I think it's all of it, like honestly,
Hmm.
because it's like that's what makes it hard. I think that's what makes it hard for people that don't actually understand what it takes to be successful. And not saying this from a point where I succeed, but to at the point to where I am today, where like I've realized this, you know, because if you've never, like you said, if you've never kind of really learn about what it takes for people to actually be successful, then this book is amazing because it opens your eyes to that and it just shows you that like consistency is what's really important. And consistency is consistently doing things that you don't want to do. And like when you're doing something consistently, it becomes mundane because you're like, you've seen it before, you've done it before. But if you understand the importance of it, right, it's like, okay, it starts to add up. And I think that's what makes being successful hard is that is are you able to do the same thing over and over and over again, right? And be willing to like sacrifice this the novelty of like something else, you know?
Definitely.
To what extent do you think?
I think that like as a general idea of like how to execute something, consistency is by far the best approach. You know, opposed to like doing sprints and then like taking a break for a while and then something like that. Like it's much better just to be consistent. But I think a really large part of success is actually just finding out like where you're going. You know, like I think that's like kind of like what Naval said, like using judgment. You know, like making sure that like wherever we're going, like you can be consistent, but if you're not being consistent towards the right things, then it doesn't matter. And that has like multiple facets too. Like your overarching goal, like whatever you're going towards, that needs to stay consistent over like through time. But like also how you're actually executing on a day-to-day basis, like the quality of like that consistency is going to matter a lot too. So it's like it's not showing up is extremely important, but also just like improving that as you go along, I think is really important. So in terms of just like how it gets done, I think that it's like all of it, right? Like as a general like idea, but in terms of like the whole enchilada of like success, I think it's probably like half because I think you have to spend a lot of time on figuring out where to go and like how that actually gets done on a ground level, and then the consistency is like the idea of like what gets that done.
And the thing on consistency that you brought up, which I really agree with, is like the quality, right? And I think I don't know if it was Kobe or something, but he just said it's like, why are you doing something if it's like the quality of that rep, the quality of that work you're doing, like it's quality consistency or consistent quality. I don't know how to put those two words together. That really does matter. And the question I have on the floor for the floor today is there anything else you would add to her achievement equation? A theory of success.
So she has, just as a reminder, um, skill is equal to effort times talent, right? And then achievement is equal to effort times skill. I don't know. It's kind of like, because like in my head, I'm like, there's a lot more factors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, but it's also like that's not really the point of the theory. So I don't. It's kind of it's a tough question because it's like,
Because is there something? Because she boiled it down. Because this theory boils down to the most important parts, right? And but is there something in this theory that she's missing?
I don't as a core idea, I actually don't think so. I just think that there's a lot of nuances in like what that actually like what each thing means, you know? Like effort isn't just like the quantity, but it's like also like the quality and like how that gets done. Like are you using like do you have a mentor? Like how like where's your information coming from? Like how does everything actually get done, right? Like what does that process look like? Like I think there's a lot more there than just like meets the eye. And of course that's why like she wrote a book on it. But like honestly like bare bones, I think generally speaking that's like the right way to look at it. But what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we can dissect each part of like what, like you said, on the effort, since that's really, I mean, it really is just talent. It's really achievement, to simply put, to not have the the filters and stuff that she has in there. It's achievement is talent times effort squared, right? And talent is something that we can't control, and as a good stoic would do, is focus on what they can control.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing we can control is our effort. So then that really being like the chunk of the equation.
Right. Well, I mean, even just finding things that you're talented at, though, as well.
So does that mean that talent part is that finding what you should do? Like, maybe we should unpack this equation more.
Yeah. I mean, I think the talent part could also, yeah, like you said, like I think that engulfs a lot of the passion part, where it's like a lot of us tend to focus on like perseverance. Like or at least we'll get to this more in like further in the episode, but like I guess a lot of us tend to neglect how much there needs to be done to cultivate passion or to like choose a field. I think that's like a big component people are missing because I think it takes a lot of time before you really know. And like
Mhm.
even if it like you choose one thing and like you don't decide that like that's your thing for a couple of years, I think the fact that you took a few years to decide like fully like flesh everything out, I think that's like a really like important process. But
It's that time that's spent feeling like you're doing nothing, but has immense amount of leverage, right?
mhm.
And it's kind of like we talked with in Naval's book. If you guys haven't listened to those episodes, go listen to them. They're probably going to be called "How to Get Rich Without Getting Lucky" or something like that.
Yeah.
But that just that time spent, because it can feel like it's wasted for some people, because it's like, oh, you're heading nowhere because you're just bouncing between like these different things that you might want to do. But then if you can channel that, it's like channeled energy. It's like you're kind of just like balling up more and more of this energy heading in the right direction, so that when you do actually use it, you pick that direction, that compass to go, it just like boosts you even further than if you would have went the wrong path. So yeah, but very interesting. Guys,
Yeah.
remember, achievement equals talent times effort squared.
One thing I do want to talk about before we move on is I remember yesterday I was talking with Andrew, my roommate, and he was like there's a Kanye documentary that just came out, and he was talking about how like yeah, like even before Kanye was famous, like he really believed himself, and he was really confident. Like I didn't expect that, and that's what Andrew told me, and I was like I think one of the big misconceptions about success, in my opinion, is that like you achieve success and then like the mindset comes after, or like like you become a certain way because you were successful, whereas like I tend to think, and I think this is backed up by most successful people, like you cultivate like a person, or your character or your personality as a successful character, right? Like you ingrain habits in yourself, you're disciplined, you do things that would make you successful, and then by the time you're successful, you act like a successful person because you made yourself a successful person, right? Not because you achieve success. Like the success was achieved because you made yourself the person that would achieve success, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not the reciprocal. And I think that makes like that was a distinction where I was like, yeah, like in my head, I'm like that makes the most sense. But I think a lot of people get it switched.
Nah, yeah, that is a counterintuitive thing. It can seem very like because someone becomes successful and because we see Kanye, Kanye's publicized all the time, we think, oh, we don't know how he was like before. We just think that's just how he is now because he's a super successful dude. When it's like he'd be saying the exact same thing if he wasn't at the stage he was, which would make him seem a little crazy because he's a little successful now. But yeah, that is such a really, that's actually really, really, really profound about the idea of just it's backwards, like you become successful based on who you are, you know,
Yeah.
who you are doesn't change because of success, at least for the good, at least for those that are like really good. But so then we have to talk about like, well, you understand this idea that grit is perseverance, but also understanding what you want to do and the passion that you have. But like, how gritty are you actually, right? So we have to go into passion because that's really the important part here. It's where you're heading. It's the direction. It's the aim that you have in life, right? And that you're gonna put all this effort. Remember, your effort squared. I think the theory sounds a lot. It sounds a lot better when you have the squared. It's like E equals MC squared. You have achievement equals talent. Talent times
A
effort
little more
squared.
sophisticated.
It makes it sound more sophisticated. Yeah. Um. But so people generally like passion much more than they like perseverance. Like people will be like, "Oh, I can put in a whole bunch of work," but they change on what they're working on. And passion is difficult to acquire. And really important distinction here is passion is not how intense you feel about something; it's how consistent you feel about something over time. And so that means passion is endurance. And an example of passion that she has is her friend named Jeffrey Gentleman, and we'll call him just Jeff here. He's an East Africa Bureau, at least at the time that she wrote this, East Africa Bureau chief for the New York Times, and he won the Pulitzer Prize for international reporting. And so Jeff never really cared about writing like while he was in college before, but he did have a passion to live and work in East Africa. And so he was a photographer like up in high school, right? He didn't have this passion of writing, but he kind of created it to fit in with his higher goal, kind of like his higher mission that he had. So his sophomore year, he backpacked around the world. He fell in love with East Africa, but East Africa didn't have like any career that he saw straight up directly that would allow him to do that. And so he kind of got this hint from a professor that was like you have some pretty good writing, and he suggested that he should write for the school paper. So then Jeff ended up doing that, and then this allowed him to figure out a way where journalism would allow him to move and be in East Africa. And so kind of like the route he took was he was an Oxford student. He worked in the Oxford student newspaper. Then he interned at some small paper in Wisconsin. Then he worked at St. Petersburg Times in Florida. Then he worked at Los Angeles Times, then the New York Times, and then became the New York Times East Africa bureau chief. And so, a quote from Jeff himself was, "It was really, it was a really winding road that took me to all kinds of places. It was difficult and discouraging and demoralizing and scary and all the rest. But eventually I got here and I got exactly where I wanted to be, Jeff." And so his route to finding his passion, like we said before, it's a difficult process and you got to go through these different winding roads sometimes. But the point is, finding passion isn't like fireworks. Like because fireworks are gone after a few minutes. Remember, passion is endurance. It's passion is how consistent you feel about something over time. So you can think of this analogy, and I like this analogy, Ben, that you put. Finding passion equals a compass, right? So it takes time to build, and it requires a lot of tinkering to get like a really good compass. But once you do, your compass will guide you for the rest of your life. And so I think that was a really, really good analogy there.
Yeah, that wasn't my analogy, although I'd love to take credit for it. But yeah, I like that analogy as well because like while you're building the compass, like you're not actually moving because like you don't have a compass, right? So you have to take time to build the compass, which is equivalent to like finding your passion. But once you find your compass, then you know where to go and how to get there in the best possible way, right? And one thing to highlight about Jeff or the example Armel gave was that he knew that he wanted to work in something related to East Africa, right? Like he wanted to maybe like be there or write about it or whatever. Like he just loved that area of the world. Writing was not like what he really like cared about, but he ended up using writing as a forum, and he was doing a bunch of other stuff, right? Like when he was writing for the newspaper, when he was writing for like, the St. Petersburg Times in Florida or wherever the newspaper is called, in Los Angeles Times, like it took him a while before he got to write exclusively about East Africa, right? Like he was doing other things. And so it took him a long time before he actually ended up exactly where he wanted to be. But he had a starting place and he got there eventually, right? So I think that was like the thing I wanted to highlight there as well. Um, but another way that Duckworth says to look at your passions is to ask yourself, do you have a life philosophy? Do you have like a lot of goals you're pursuing, a lot of projects, or do you know exactly the one thing that you want? She goes on to say like you really need a well-defined philosophy, because and you can kind of think of this as like your purpose in life. It is kind of like your philosophy orders your hierarchy of goals. We've talked about kind of setting different levels of goals. And I think multiple podcasts previously, but I'll quickly go over it again. Like in this scenario, like the terminology is like our philosophy is like your overarching goal, right? This is something that guides the rest of your life decisions. And then below that is you have your mid-level goals. So these can be pretty audacious. There's multiple tiers. They can be pretty audacious, or they can be kind of more bland. So um, I guess to go back to the philosophy real quick to give an example. I thought this example was kind of corny, to be honest. But she gave Pete Carroll's example, and Pete Carroll is the head coach for the Seattle Seahawks, or at least he was when I last checked, but I think he's still there. His is do things better than they have ever been done before, which to me was a little vague. I thought that his philosophy should be, I don't know, much more aligned with like what he was doing. So I kind of thought I interpreted it as him saying like do things better than they've ever been done before in the realm of football because he's a football coach, right? And so his philosophy was more of like how to apply what he was doing to his career, and like his really like overarching like purpose was to be the best, like essentially change the game of football, like be the best that there's ever been in football, right? Now that's my opinion on how it should be interpreted, but I do think that your philosophy should be more specific than just like do things better than they've ever been done before, because that seems a little too vague.
I was thinking, because we said a life philosophy, I was thinking it was supposed to be broader than just a specific thing, and then just ties in, and then as you go down to the different goals, you apply that life philosophy to the specific domains that you are in.
I thought that his philosophy was like even like a little too broad though, because like
Yeah.
he's not applying it to, like it just seems like like that wouldn't like really guide me, like if I'm trying to like do things better than I've ever done before, like how does that help me figure out like what I should do? That was, I guess that was kind of my big question there. But moving on though, like your mid-level goals are kind of under that, right? So for Pete Carroll, his mid-level goals would be something like win the Super Bowl, or maybe a little bit smaller, like under a top tier mid-level goal, he'd have like a like a mid-level goal. I know this is kind of like goals, and there's like goals and goals, but maybe he just wants to win the last 3 games of the season to get into the playoffs, and then in the playoffs, win the NFC or the AFC championship to get to the Super Bowl, and then win the Super Bowl. So there's like you can have a hierarchy within the mid-level, and then lastly you have your low-level goals, and these are like your your on the ground goals for the day. I want to work out, or I want to play the football for 2 hours. I want to practice that. So it's much more tangible. I want to wake up by 6 a.m. and get 3 hours of work done by 10 a.m. Right? And so circling back, the point that Duckworth was making was that you need to have an overarching life philosophy or purpose to organize a lot of your goals. We all have kind of a lot of things we want to do, but unless we filter them, we're going to end up going in like 8 or 10 different directions and never actually getting far in any one of them. And that can hurt us in the long run because we have no expertise in anything. Whereas other people have worked on something for years and they have expertise in that. And once they're the best, then they branch out, right? So all that to say is you should have a life philosophy. And I really like this quote by Tom Seaver. He's a Hall of Fame pitcher. And so his goal was pitch the best he possibly could day after day, year after year. Or that was really his life philosophy, right? And he said, pitching determines what I eat, when I go to bed, what I do when I'm awake. It determines how I spend my life when I'm not pitching. If it means I have to remind myself to pet dogs with my left hand or throw logs in the fire with my left hand, then I do that. Pitching is what makes me happy. I've devoted my life to it. I'm happy when I pitch well, so I only do things that help me be happy. So, the point, get a life philosophy like Tom Seaver so that can organize the rest of your life and organize your goals.
And I think I just thought of a question and talk about it in a debrief of what's the difference between a life philosophy and a goal. But we'll talk more about that. But so a guide to kind of help you. So you set this life philosophy, and now you want to think about goals to actually set. And there's different hierarchies, like Ben mentioned. Those mid-level goals are to help you head towards that life philosophy, and those low-level goals are stepping stones for the mid-level goals. And one of the one good exercise that had actually been brought up twice about figuring out how to prioritize the goals is this Warren Buffett 3-step process. And so what Warren Buffett says you should do, and if you don't know who Warren Buffett is, he's one of icon investors that's worth probably around up to 100 billion plus dollars. And just is kind of in common, it's a consensus in the investing world that he's one of the best, not if not the best investor out there. And so one of the his 3-step process for prioritizing your goals is, first, write down 25 career goals. You might think that is a lot, but these are all the types of goals, from the small to the big, like just every single goal you can think of. The first 25 that pop to your head, because they're probably the most important, and it's easier than you think. And the second is, now circle the 5 highest priority goals. Look at them and say, which one of these are the most important goals that I care about, right? And then the funniest part, third step is, take a good look at the other 20 goals and avoid them at all cost. Cut them out. Absolutely. Don't think about them. Never. Just avoid them at all costs, because achievements are distractions. And this is saying that these other goals that you want to achieve, these possible achievements, they're just distractions from the real goals, from the bigger, more important achievements that you have. And so that's why he says to cut them. So the steps are: write down 25, circle 5, and then the rest completely avoid, because they are distractions. And the point of this exercise is, you have limited time and resources. You can't do everything. So it's honestly, and that's something I've heard repeatedly now, is like success is more about what you don't do, right? Think about that. Like, success is more about what you don't do than what you do, because you might be doing things that are going to help you be successful, but you're also doing detrimental things. And if you cut out those detrimental things, it'll give you more time to do the important things, and you'll also just see how much growth you can make. Instead of going forward and backwards, you're only going forwards. So deciding what you are not going to do is just as important or more important than what you decide to do. And so Angela adds another question here. And let me put some respect on her name, Dr. Duckworth. To what extent, she asked the question, to what extent do these goals serve a common purpose, right? And so the question here is just asking, these 5 goals, do they all like align a certain way to a bigger goal, to your life philosophy? Like, how do they all tie in into that? And the more aligned these goals are, the more like I guess the best way to think about it is like a theme of these goals. If a lot of your goals have the same theme, then the more aligned your passion will be. And the only goal, and I put quote around goal, that is immutable is your life philosophy. And so that means everything else below, like, don't be afraid to change them. Your life philosophy is telling you where you're aiming at, but all these other goals are just to help you progress there, right? Like, your goals are to help you progress. Like, progress isn't the goal, if that makes sense. So, I think I actually said that wrong. Your goals are to help you progress, but you're not just progressing towards a goal. And so that's the thing to think about with the different goals, is like, they're just a way to help you make sure you continuously progress. And it doesn't matter if you need to change them. Just do what is best to help you get to that higher life philosophy. And success can be the worst teacher, because people can get complacent. But failure, make sure you learn from those failures and continue to move forward.
No, I just thought it was funny when you were like, because we had talked a lot about like the purpose of goals is progression, And it was just funny that you just dropped that bomb, like just so casually. I was like, that's pretty funny. Like, because you just didn't introduce, you're like, check this out. No, you just like dropped it. And I was like, that's crazy. Like, he's so bold with that. But, anyways, we'll talk about that more in the debrief. I guess one last thing she touches on in this section of the book is just where does grit come from? Is it genetic? And she says that like grit, just like talent, your ability to persevere, your ability to resist the tough times and overcome obstacles is partially a function of your genetics. But just like achievement, your effort counts twice, right? Like your effort is going to count far more than your genetics in determining how gritty you are. You can grow your grit. That's kind of like she has a whole chapter on like you can definitely grow your grit, but it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work. And she kind of looks at, there's an overarching trend. So they did like a large study of a large sample of a lot of Americans. They asked them all to do a survey, and what they found was using Duckworth's grit scale, or maybe someone else's, I'm not sure, that older people have more grit. So if you look at a graph of like how gritty people are based on their age, you'll see that as people are younger, they have less grit, and as they get older, they're much grittier. And that seems to be true pretty linearly across all ages. So it improves between 18 and 26, and it improves between your 20s and your 30s, and so on, right? And so there's really only two explanations for that. The first is that the older generation is just grittier than us. But the second one that Angela Duckworth, like Dr. Duckworth prefers, and I think makes more sense, is that as you get older, as you get more experience, as you do more things in life, you become grittier, right? As you have to overcome more obstacles, which is like that's just going to happen as you live longer, you're going to become grittier and you're going to become more resilient. And that would suggest that grit grows, and you can grow it faster. You don't have to just rely on life in general. You can do things day in and day out that are going to grow your grit, like cold showers.
I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet.
Well, I'm going to get you there one day, Mel. But regardless of either explanation, there's a large body of evidence that would suggest that you can grow your grit, you can grow your perseverance, and that's super important, because if you don't believe that you can improve, you can't improve, right? Like that's pretty obvious, but it's something that people just don't internalize, right? Because a lot of people, they know that, but they still don't think that they can improve, and that's just not true, right? So the first step is actually believing that you can do something, and that will enable you to actually go do it. Now, of course, there's a lot more work to be done, but that's where you need to start.
What did you say again? If people can't think they can do it.
I think I said like if people don't think they can do it, they can't, or the first step, something along those lines.
That's you guys need to take that in, rewind it, listen to it again, write it down.
Yeah, just rewind. I'm not sure what I said, but the point is that you can grow your grit. And next episode, we're going to talk about how to develop grit. She kind of lays out a little template with interest, practice, purpose, and hope. And so we're going to flesh that out fully as far as developing grit and developing your passion and getting that into like an overarching like life philosophy or life goal or purpose, I should say.
And now for your favorite part, the second debrief of the episode. This man out here took theory of knowledge and now think he knowledgeable, and now writing to what extent for every question.
It just reminded me because she put to what extent for all her questions. And I think it's like I think it's like one of those things that's like it's like standard or like right to what extent. I think that's like it's an academic thing.
People things.
But yeah, to what extent are people born with grit, do you think? And how important is that? As you grow older, like how important is that baseline, if at all, in determining your grittiness compared to your environment or your experiences?
What does it mean to be born with grit?
Like, maybe, some people are more predisposed to like push through, so like they can handle, like maybe they have like a higher pain tolerance, or they're just more motivated for whatever reason. They're higher in competitiveness, some things like that. Personality traits that would make someone naturally more gritty. I don't know if that's like true or not. I mean,
And then that goes down to even deeper question is, well, how much of personality is
yeah, no,
born
it's
and
true.
so I guess if this doesn't kind of show you what I think, but wait, how much a person born compared to their environment? Oh, environment experiences. We'll not compare those two. So this highlights more what I think of. I think it has a lot to do with your environment and the experiences, but just because I don't understand like how you can genetically show like certain those traits, right? And because I feel like those traits come from like your parents and your upbringing, and also the thing is like almost you can kind of put the idea of like if you have this natural tendency to do something because you were when you were really young before you could even like understand your own thoughts and that your parents just exposed you to certain things that you can kind of say like that's kind of how you were born with it because at the same way your parents give birth to you or your mother gives birth to you, it's just kind of like the same way your parents kind of train you in this world before you can even understand the world you're in. And but I mean, just boil it down, I'd probably say it's like 80-70% like your environment. And it's just like because if you with parents, like I have parents that um they don't say this explicitly, but like they're the type of parents is like they just if they want to do it, like they'll just keep trying to do it, you know? Like my mom's been working towards got her PhD like when she was like 48 or something. And it's like she just kept wanting to do it and then like did it. And it's like she just believed, you know? Like my dad just, wants to start a local grocery store and then he just does it and like he's still doing it. And it's like they just like believe they just did it. And so that like trained me without them even telling me that, oh yeah, if I just want to do it, like I should just gotta work and do it. And so it's like I don't know how else you can develop that. You know, it's like you either have a friend, just someone you look up to, like maybe that aren't your parents, but maybe you looked up to like Kobe and that like inspired you and stuff like that. So I definitely think it's majority environment. What
No, for
about
sure.
you?
No, I would definitely agree, and I don't really have too much, too many anything different to say on that, but like from what you said, really, except for the fact there actually isn't different. It's kind of a tangent. Um, I think something Tim Ferriss said: your success can be determined based on the number of uncomfortable things that you can do. Something along those lines. And I thought that was actually really, I thought that was a really like interesting, like good quote because we, a lot of what resilience and overcoming barriers is you're encountering something for the new time or a new time, a new instantiation, and you're just not sure how to deal with it, right? And it's super uncomfortable. Anything that's new is just always uncomfortable. There's such a large learning curve with stuff. It's like, oh, like I hit a plateau. Like, how do I get through this plateau? I've never plateaued before, right? Like, how do I get, how do I break the barrier into like the next, what's my next evolution in this domain? And it's like, that's super uncomfortable. And it's like the way you kind of automate that and just break through a lot of the uncomfortable things is by constantly doing uncomfortable things because that will just make it so much easier when uncomfortable things come around for you to just lean in and just start doing them. You don't even think about, you know, should I do this or should I not? It's gonna suck. It's like no. It's gonna suck, but it's like you're ready for that. And so like I think that's a big part of being successful is just like leaning in to doing uncomfortable things consistently, even if they're just small things on a daily basis. And I mentioned that just because I think it's a big part of how you could grow perseverance or grit is just by doing things that you really don't want to do on a daily basis.
That's because growth is uncomfortable. Like it's just the simple fact. It's like all the moments where you've really grown have been the most uncomfortable moments of your life. And yeah, just think about that. Like growth is uncomfortable. But now let me pose my theory of knowledge question. This one is something that's a good question for you. To what extent does essentialism tie into the idea of grit? And can you define essentialism for the people that are listening?
Yes, essentialism is as you may be able to guess. This is as defined by Greg McEwen, who wrote a book called Essentialism. But it's basically your ability to focus in life. Like and I mean that in a macro sense. Your ability to really just narrow down what you're doing to a couple things and make everything in your life. Everything should be vital. Everything should be, there should be no excess, right? And by focusing on a couple things, maybe just one thing, you can get the best out of that thing. And getting the best out of that thing is better than getting half or 80% out of 4 or 5 things. That's kind of the idea of essentialism. I think in a lot of ways they're one and the same, right? Because what is essentialism is essentially in my head, like the best method of goal setting, right? It's the best way to decide what you should be doing. And that's like we talked about earlier. And, that's like half of it, right? Like deciding what you should be doing is like, that's like a lot of the work that's really, really hard. It's really vague. It's like, what should I do? And like, how should that be done? Right. And it's like, if you're essentialist about what you're doing, then you're really focusing on something. And by focusing, you can make a lot of progress really quickly. And then from there, you can branch out. But, being essential in your goals and focusing on what really matters, like, I don't even know if you could separate that from being gritty.
Yeah, and it ties into, because when I was just reading it, it just made me think like, yeah, this is like essentialism, where if you're focusing on so many different things at once, it's like, if you're switching between those things, it's like to actually have true passion is to consistently want to do that thing over time, right? And so that just really ties in. And there's nothing else I can add. I mean, you're Mr. Essentialism over here.
I don't know about that, but
but is there? Oh, the last thing I want to tie in, ask about the difference between life philosophy and goal. I want to go on this rant because the only reason I'm a bit of rush.
Go ahead.
Our computer is about to die, so I don't want this recording.
Your computer is about to die.
Yeah, my computer.
I'm kidding.
So the difference between a life philosophy and goals, to me, like I mentioned, goals are to help you progress, right? This is different how people think about them. Is people think that they progress towards a goal. But really in life, it's like we want to continuously progress. Even if we reach a goal, we'll always want more, right? And so that really means that these goals are just to help us continue progressing. And that's what a life philosophy is. It's an aim of progress. It's like the progress that you're aiming towards, if that makes sense. It's because you're never going to achieve a life philosophy. You live a life philosophy. To have a life philosophy is to be, right? To progress is to be, because that's what fundamentally we do as humans, is we continuously progress and evolve, and that is just our being. And so these goals, the difference between a life philosophy and a goal is that a goal is to help you progress. It is a clear, definite stopping point, which there will be another one you use to just kind of measure your progress. But a life philosophy is the progress itself. And that to me was like what the difference is of those two. Is there anything you want to add?
Not really. Just one thing I guess that I think is really profound is like, this is just kind of reframing what you said. The joy is in the progress, not the achievement. I think about that a lot. Like the joy is in knowing that not only are you improving, or like not only are you trying to improve, but that it's working, right? Like waking up every day and looking back on yesterday or last week and seeing the small incremental progression. It's not necessarily where you are right now, like not the absolute value of like what you've achieved that gives you happiness. It's the difference between today and yesterday. Like it's literally the joy is in the progression. I don't know any other way to say it except that, but I just like, that's like a really profound aspect of what Mel talked about.
I remember when we covered that in like one of the first episodes we ever like recorded, about you find happiness in progressing towards something and not actually achieving it. And with that being said, you want to give the people a good recap? Quick
Recap. Hold on, let me scroll up to the top real quick. This could take one second. So we went over the basics of grit. So we started off just kind of saying that like grit, as Angela Duckworth defined it, is passion and perseverance. Passion being defining what you want to do, and perseverance being resilient in that passion, right? Then we talked about talent, how we like to idolize people and we like to look at people and say, wow, like they're so talented, but that we often use talent as an excuse for not putting in the work ourselves to what we want to do. And so it's a way to get out of doing the work, right? And then we talked about Angela Duckworth's theory that skill equals effort times talent, and achievement equals skill times effort, or
Let's
all
simplify
put
that.
together, achievement is equal to effort squared times talent. So the point there, though, is that effort counts twice, because effort contributes not only to improving your skill, but you're also achieving things as your effort increases. And then we talked about how gritty are you. So focusing on the two aspects, like I mentioned, of perseverance and passion. Most people are lacking more in the passion than they are in the perseverance. But we will talk more about how to define your passion next episode. But we did go over a small example with Jeff this episode, how it's often a windy path. It takes a while. It looks like a mess, but once you find your compass, it will guide you. And then a quick tip from Warren Buffett in terms of how to prioritize, writing down your goals, finding the top 5, and then avoiding the others at all costs because they will distract you from your true goals or what could really be your best, right? And that's pretty much what we talked about. Yeah.
And you guys know the last part.
My favorite part, a quote with Armelicus Melius.
The human individual lives usually far within his limits. He possesses powers of various sorts which he habitually fails to use. He energizes below his maximum and he behaves below his optimum. William James. If that doesn't make you want to be like, I need to reach my potential, that's the quote that stuck with me through this whole book. That was the most important thing. Thank you guys so much for listening. It's been an honor to have you guys explore these ideas with us. We appreciate you. You guys make sure you follow us on social media. We promise we'll start posting more because we'll have something that'll do it for us. And yeah, anything you want to add, Ben?
Just thank you guys for listening. We really appreciate it.
Till next time, peace.